Hello, and welcome back to Found, TechCrunch's podcast that brings you the stories behind the startups. I'm your host, Becca, and this week we have a special episode for you, dear listeners. Today, we are bringing you a conversation I had with Steve Case at TechCrunch's Strictly VC event on June 11th. Case, the former co-founder and executive chairman of AOL and current founder of VC firm Revolution, talked about how it's imperative that the AI wave isn't concentrated to the coastal startup hubs, and how VCs, policymakers, and big tech companies can work to prevent that from happening. It's a great conversation, so give it a listen, and we'll be back next Tuesday. Hello, everyone, and just to echo what Connie said, thank you all so much for being here. As she also mentioned, we're sitting here with Steve Case, which is a pleasure on our part. So, I know people have probably heard of this little thing called artificial intelligence. And if you haven't, you'll probably know what it is by the end of tonight. So I think one thing we want to start off talking with you about is you have been here for a few market cycles. You've also seen a couple boom and busts of different types of technology. So thinking back to the AOL days, the rise of the internet, and thinking about what we're going through today with AI, what do you think about when you look at the two of those trends together? What's similar, and what are you thinking about watching AI now?
It's a great question. First of all, I should just say welcome to everybody. It's great to see this turnout tonight. When we started AOL almost 40 years ago here in the Washington, D.C. area, there was really no venture capital in the Washington area. When we started Revolution about 20 years ago, it was still pretty rare, and it's been developing nicely. Still, obviously, still room for growth, but it's great to see the VC community developing and the ecosystem around startups across a lot of sectors developing, and we're delighted to be kind of co-hosting this with Strictly VC and TechCrunch. So the backstory on AOL that then ties in with your question on AI, when we started, it was 1985. Only 3% of people were online. Those 3% were online an average of 1 hour a week. So it's pretty early days in terms of getting America online, getting the internet to be part of everyday life. And there are a bunch of policy decisions that ended up in retrospect being pivotal. One was a decision a few blocks from here by Judge Green to break up Ma Bell, the phone company, and create regional Bell operating companies, which unleashed competition, lowered the prices. Another was a decision about 50 years ago to fund out of ARPA, then DARPA, the creation of the internet, the investment in the core technologies to build the internet. Another, also a few blocks from here at the FCC, was a decision to force the telephone companies to open their networks. It was called open access. It allowed companies like AOL to kind of ride on their rails. And the final one was actually a congressional decision, the Telecom Act, that commercialized the internet. When we first started in AOL in 1985, it was still illegal for consumers or businesses to be on the internet. It was restricted to government agencies and educational institutions. It sounds crazy now, but was true then. So Congress had to basically pass this legislation to open up. So those were some of the things in retrospect, as I look back, that were pivotal. As we look at AI, the interesting thing to me is the internet is basically 50 years old. AI is 75 years old.
Right.
So actually AI is older than the internet, but it's having its internet moment, what some have called its Netscape moment, about 2 years ago with obviously the release of ChatGPT. And so it went from bubbling rather slowly, quietly for 75 years before breaking into the mainstream. As a result, now there's much more attention, obviously, with companies and with policymakers here in Brussels, other places, trying to figure out what the right policies are. And what I argued when I was testifying at the Senate, the AI forums that Senator Schumer was putting together, that one area they should look at, there are obviously many facets to it, was this open access idea, building on what made the internet possible. How do you make sure, this is not just about big tech getting bigger, but it enables smaller companies, startups, including VC-backed companies, to compete, particularly as it shifts from the broader horizontal platform plays, which you've seen in the last couple of years, to more vertical AI across a lot of different industries.
And we've talked a little bit about what is different this time and sort of what is the same, but I'm curious, what did we learn from the rise of the internet that we could apply today to maybe make AI, not necessarily that the internet had a bad rollout or anything like that, but maybe prevent some of the problems with AI before they happen?
I think most people, obviously there are different views, most people thought it was wise in the early days of the internet because it was so nascent, as I mentioned, for government, once they took the steps that I just mentioned, the open access and the breakup and things like that, to have a relatively light touch in terms of regulation. They didn't quite know what was going to happen. He didn't know, even things like e-commerce, he didn't know how popular that would be. And so they kind of said, let's this run a little bit. Let's err on the side of a little more innovation, a little less regulation. What's different about AI is how it, kind of became this overnight phenomenon, and really a global phenomenon. It took us 9 years to get 1 million members. It took OpenAI something like 3 months to get 100 million. So obviously they're smarter than we are, but the times also have changed. And so as a result, it does require more intervention. The other thing I think most people would say with the internet is, in retrospect, some aspects, particularly social media, probably should have been watched more closely. Some things that have happened there that have been pretty divisive, and there are a lot of challenges. Now people are trying to figure out what to do about that, which is leading Congress and others to say, with AI, we shouldn't wait too long to put, kind of guardrails in place and kind of a roadmap in terms of how this should develop in place. At the same time, there is a recognition, I think appropriately, goes back to what I said before, as America needs to lead with this new technology. We're coming up on our 250th birthday in 2 years. We need to make sure we remain the most innovative entrepreneurial nation in the world. We need to have the leading economy in the world. So we need to lean into new technologies, new industries, new opportunities with a bias towards not just what might go wrong, but also what might go right. So we don't want to overregulate. We don't want to overreact. At the same time, in the case of AI, for the reasons I mentioned, it does require some action now. And that's what people in Congress are trying to figure out, how to strike that balance, almost a Goldilocks solution to AI, not too little, not too big, just right.
And I know you mentioned how open source is super important here with the rise of AI and sort of looking at potential policy and things like that. And I want to maybe double down on that a little bit. And why is a focus on open source so important, especially when we're talking about the rise of AI?
Well, first of all, I don't have anything against large, successful companies. Our next speaker, Lena Khan, might have a slightly different view. And I should say, I feel a little old because Lena was in college in the same class as my son. So I'm feeling a little bit old here, but Lena has done a great job in framing some of the challenges broadly in terms of the big getting bigger, and obviously taken action through FTC in a number of cases, many of which I support. Some I think might have been a little bit of an overreach, but the courts will see that through. I think that is important. I am not arguing in favor of big tech. I'm more in favor of little tech. My passion, my focus, like many of you, is on startups, the next generation of entrepreneurs that can create the next companies, and they can only do that if they have a real shot, if they have a level playing field. AOL would not have existed if it hadn't been for that decision to open up the networks and provide open access. So if you don't have essentially open source in the area of AI, even though I acknowledge there's risk associated with open source, including national security risk, I'm not naive about that, but I think the biggest risk would be not enabling, kind of this whole new generation of innovators and entrepreneurs to participate and just allowing the big tech companies to get bigger. So it's important that we support the bigger companies, allow them to take actions that do maximize the likelihood America continue to lead, but not just rely on them. We need to make sure they have platforms that are open. And the history of technology, certainly the history I've seen, is many companies in the early phase of innovation are open. They're trying to build support for their platforms, build developer communities around their platforms. That's what Facebook did. That's what Twitter did. That's what most companies do. But at some point, when they become leaders and maybe in some cases even become dominant, they tend to close things down and put toll gates up. And so right now, things tend to be more open, although I would say OpenAI is not really open. It has deals with a lot of companies, including obviously Microsoft and yesterday Apple. And so they have a lot of partnerships, but we need to make sure that the broad platforms, the large language models are open now and in the future. And we also need to make sure venture capitalists, including hopefully some in this room, are backing some of these companies focused in vertical areas. And the last point I'll make goes back to another passion is which we call rise of the rest. How do we make sure the innovation is not just happening in a few places like Silicon Valley, but happening in many places all across the country? And with our Rise the Rest fund, we've now invested in 200 companies in 100 different cities, including a number of companies in the AI space. Tempest AI in Chicago focused on health tech, Carbon Robotics in Seattle focused on ag tech, Prion in North Carolina focused on enterprise software, Catalyte not far from here in Baltimore focused on ed tech. These are all AI companies that are not just in the normal tech hubs, they're in other places around the country. I think that's also important because I think strategically, and I worked on a report that just came out a couple of months ago a national entrepreneurship strategy. It was part of the Commerce Department. I co-chaired something called the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And the report and the recommendations were really about how does America continue to lead, but do it in a more inclusive way that brings along more people and more places so we can be creating jobs and opportunity in lots of places, not just in a few places, which also might help, at least in a small way, bridge this divide we have in our country where a lot of people do feel left out and left behind. And we have a role as entrepreneurs, as investors to address that and not just be backing the same people in the same places, but cast a wider lens, have a broader funnel, because some of these amazing companies are happening all over the country.
More from this conversation right after a quick break. And what you guys do at Revolution definitely resonates with me as someone, if anyone reads any of my work on TechCrunch, you'll notice a lot of the startups I cover are not in Silicon Valley, and they're not in New York, and they're not in Boston, because I think it is interesting to kind of highlight the stories and the companies growing outside of those places, because they do often get overlooked. But when thinking about that in the context of AI, why is it so important to make sure that there are companies outside the hubs in building in the AI space who are getting the support and are getting sort of the resources they need to be successful?
Several reasons. First of all, the data says that most jobs are created not by small business or big business, but new business, startups under 5 years old. So if you're not backing new businesses, startups, some of which will fail, but some of which will scale into being the next big companies of tomorrow, and doing it in a lot of places, those places will over time be hollowed out because the disruption happening on the coast will end up essentially destroying jobs in other parts of the country and displacing a lot of people and hurting a lot of families. And you've seen that play out over the last several decades across a variety of different sectors. So there's sort of an economic policy focus, which is why down the street, Congress, in a bipartisan way, has done a number of things about place-based economic strategy. Some even call industrial policy. The Chips and Science Act was part of that, not just investing in chips, not just investing in science, but also investing in tech hubs. Other initiatives are also underway, including NSF, a program called Engines to focus on tech hubs. So that's one part of it. But there's another part of it, which is that AI is going to start shifting, as I said, from these horizontal opportunities to these vertical opportunities. And AI will help reimagine, and already is, healthcare and education and food and agriculture and financial services. All these different sectors are up for grabs, and it's going to require partnerships with a lot of the existing companies to really get traction. Many of those companies are in the middle of the country. More than half of the Fortune 500 companies are in the middle of the country, yet 75% of the venture capital is in 3 states on the coast. And so building a bridge is going to be critically important. My view, and I wrote a book a number of years ago called The Third Wave, is in this next wave of innovation, place is going to matter more, which ties in with Rise of the Rest. Policy is going to matter more, which is why you see more and more interest in DC, including Strictly VC and Andreessen Horowitz opening an office here this month. That policy aspect is going to be critically important. But partnerships are also going to be critically important. Almost all the successful companies are going to need partnerships. So Tempus, I mentioned, the healthcare AI company, has been able to aggregate a lot of data from a lot of partners. That's what makes them a successful. Clear, another company that's focused on biometric technology, working with airports and airlines, needed partnerships with the Transportation Authority. TSA needed partnerships with the airports and needed partnerships with the airplanes. Otherwise, their biometric technology really had no real value. And so the partnerships are going to be important. And some of the key partners in these sectors that are up for grabs are in the middle of the country. So it's great that there is more of a focus from investors, from entrepreneurs, from policymakers, not just what's happening on the coast, but what's happening all across the country. That will maximize the likelihood. We'll have more shots of goal in terms of making sure America leads in the AI revolution, and we do it in a more inclusive way.
And something else that's going on this year that I'm sure everyone in the room is very well aware of is that we are in an election year. And of course, the big
we are?
Oh, well, they already kind of picked the 2 candidates. I'll be honest. But
I'm too young to run.
Well, the presidential election is, of course, getting a lot of coverage and a lot of press, as it should be. But there are local races that, of course, play a big factor in some of these things, too, like upcoming policy and regulation, things like Senate races in states that maybe we're not thinking about in this conversation that will play a role. So I'm curious, of course, not asking you to share who you think will win or who you want to win on any of these races, but how much should people pay attention to the upcoming elections this year as it relates to AI policy that would impact these potential companies?
Well, I do, just as a policy matter. I've chosen to stay out of politics. I said I worked on the on this National Advisory Council. I worked on the Jobs Act 11 years ago, worked on opportunity zones, worked on the tech hubs legislation that I mentioned. I found that my passion is innovation, entrepreneurship, job creation, kind of economic growth, and so forth. It's better. I can accomplish more if I focus on policy, do it in a bipartisan way, and stay out of politics. So that's my general view. And I don't, I'm not a donor to campaigns. I'm not, active in the process. But I do think it's a very important election nationally and locally for a whole host of reasons, but also in terms of AI specifically. And some of this is what's motivating some of the big AI companies and more broadly the tech companies to be at the table here in Washington or in Brussels trying to work on legislation, because I think it's now 700 and something laws are been proposed in a variety of different states, which will create a patchwork of regulations will be very difficult to manage. So almost every company, while they might prefer less regulation, would rather have a clear sense of what the playing field looks like and not have different states do different things. We saw that in the early days of the internet. There was a real push to have kind of unified federal policies on key things as opposed to have states do different things that made it much more difficult. And some of that happened with tax policy and other things, but as much as possible, the core policies that were driving the internet, and I think the core policies that are driving AI, it's better to have a more integrated national view of them. But there will be some more action in different states. You're seeing almost every week new legislation kind of introduced. And I do think more broadly, it goes back to what I said before about the themes of place and partnership and policy. I think those are the 3 Ps that will dominate this next 10 or 20 years of our innovation economy. It's going to be critically important for all of you to be engaged on policy and make sure that people understand, policymakers understand the issues, and they strike the right balance. They get the things right. You can't sit on the sidelines and then complain if something else happens. You've got to be in the game. You have to be engaged, which is why you see more and more technologists, investors, and others spending more and more time here. That will become even more common over the next decade. I think you'll see more firms opening up, venture firms in Silicon Valley opening up offices here in Washington.
And a note on that, with people being here and people having a part in helping to write and helping to sort of sway, sounds much heavier than I mean it to be, but help sway potential policy and regulation. Smaller companies don't necessarily have the resources to do that. How can larger companies both work to get their own interests forward while working on this potential policy or talking with people working on it, while still being able to find that, like you said, you keep saying balance, find that balance where small and large companies will be able to succeed?
Well, I think I certainly understand that. And as I said, we backed a lot of companies. We have a seed fund, a venture fund, a growth fund, and we backed a lot of companies at a variety of stages of development. Obviously, at the earliest seed stage, they basically focused on survival, trying to figure out product market fit, get their first customers, hire their first team, and they don't have the same level of time to engage on policy matters. But as they start getting a little larger and get the venture stage, certainly the growth stage, they have more time and they recognize it's more of an imperative to be engaged. And it's really on multiple levels. Some of it's the broader policy where you're often just trying to educate people about what's happening. And then there's specific issues that address specific problems or opportunities either your company or your sector have. And I should note on that front that most people look at policy as a problem, as something that's going to slow down innovation, as something you have to jump through hoops in terms of, dealing with regulations around drug development or what have you. And there's definitely that aspect to it. But we've also seen many examples where policy changes have unleashed opportunity and accelerated growth. We saw that with one of the companies we backed a number of years ago, DraftKings, which initially was focused on fantasy sports, but when a Supreme Court made a decision that allowed states to decide whether they wanted gaming or not, it actually unleashed a growth opportunity for that company. We've seen that with other companies as well. I do want to make one other point. We started Rise the Rest 10 years ago this month. That was the first city we went. We had these bus tours. We went to 50 cities. And as I mentioned earlier, we ended up investing in 100 different cities. And that started in Detroit. And we're back in Detroit next week to celebrate the progress they've made, which is remarkable. The year before we arrived, the city of Detroit went bankrupt. It lost 60% of its population over a half century, then went bankrupt. And the downtown was largely abandoned. Now the downtown is largely filled, mostly with startups. Cranes are building new buildings, and Detroit still has challenges for sure, but it shows what's possible if you're betting on entrepreneurs, you're helping create jobs in these communities. And we've seen that all over the country. So it really is remarkable to see the momentum. And I hope the venture capitalists who are here, first of all, as I said at the very beginning, it's great to see them in DC as opposed to in other cities. But I hope they also hit the road and see what's happening in different parts of the country, because there still is an arbitrage. Venture capitalists investing in a company in Nebraska or in Ohio or in Minnesota, the valuation still, particularly at the seed and even a little bit at the venture stage, there tends to be an arbitrage which starts closing at the growth stage and is completely closed by the time companies go public. So there is an opportunity to generate great returns by backing entrepreneurs in these places that are reimagining industries that are important aspects of our lives, and in the process, not just generate great returns, but also be a catalyst for the next wave of job creation, economic dynamism in many parts of the country.
And we are out of time, so join me in thanking Steve for coming with us.
Thank you all.
Found is hosted by myself, TechCrunch senior reporter Becca Skutak, alongside senior reporter Dominic Midori-Davis. Found is produced by Maggie Stamets with editing by Kel. Our illustrator is Bryce Durbin. Found's audience development and social media is managed by Morgan Little, Alyssa Stringer, and Natalie Kreisman. TechCrunch's audio products are managed by Henry Pickavet. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back next week.